It is Monday and it is a very good day to start a new vlog. Why is it the color? Okay, now it's good. I wanted to start this vlog with a new book I started reading. This book is about Gertrude Bell and it was edited by Georgina Howell. It's called A Woman in Arabia, The Writings of the Queen of the Desert. She has also written a biography of Gertrude Bell, and I looked into her a little bit, and she was primarily a writer for different magazines, I guess mostly fashion magazines. She was a model, I think, in the 70s. I have so many questions for her after reading only 18 pages of this book, but I will not be able to ask those questions because she passed away a year after this book was published. So this book is biography of Gertrude Bell through her writing, her letters, her diaries, and it contains also Georgina Howell's explanation, or that is elaboration of these diary entries, the time when they were taken, and a little bit of a context, historical context at the time. However, this book is very problematic simply because it creates this very washed out discourse about British imperialism as ultimately the best thing that could have happened to all the peoples in the Middle East as they were working on releasing them from the oppressive chains of the Ottoman Empire. It is very problematic also the way she writes about Gertrude Bell and her family, her position in society. She talks about her from this perspective of being a woman ahead of her time, does not address her father's wealth and the fact that he was a capitalist from the perspective of exploitation of workers, and hence being able to possess this wealth because he was exploiting workers in the industrialized Britain at the time. He was a factory owner, and it does not talk about the class position that Gertrude Bell belonged to. She represents her as this rebellious woman who was breaking these patriarchal norms at the time, while at the same time ignores the fact that the only reason Gertrude Bell was able to do that was because she was a daughter of a wealthy capitalist. In her description of the historical context of the Middle East, obviously Ottoman Empire and Russia at the time, which had the revolution, the communist revolution, was represented as this lingering, menacing, evil force from the north that might invade and subjugate the people in the Middle East, while the British Empire is represented as a protector of the people in the Middle East and representative of the interests of the people in the Middle East. Should I say why this is problematic? I mean, if you're on this channel, I'm very much sure that you understand why this is problematic. I will be reading also articles that I found that are quite critical of Gertrude Bell and her work for the British Empire. She was essentially a spy for the British Empire, and she was gathering intelligence. That is, she was gathering information about the local cultures, histories. She also learned most of the dialects in Arabic in the region with an intent to actually better understand the culture. And as Georgina Howell says, this was well meant because she had such passion for languages. Before she started learning Arabic, she learned, I think, German, Italian, and French. So it's very devoid of a wider historical context. And if it gives a wider historical context, it gives it from this very Western perspective, positive view. In the light of reading this, I found some information that I would also like to fact check. And in general, although this book is very problematic and I avoid reading this kind of material, I at the same time believe it is crucial to read from time to time books like this one, so we can understand where common knowledge about certain discourses comes from, how it is built, how it is carefully curated, and why would certain publishers like Penguin publish this. I think it's Penguin. Yeah, it's Penguin Classics. So why would Penguin Classics publish a book like this? It's also very interesting for me to think about the fact that the woman who wrote this book, she's not a historian, she's not an academic, she's actually a writer. She was a writer for fashion magazines. So, I mean, there is nothing wrong with being a writer for fashion magazines, but her understanding of the history is greatly affected by her lack of education in British colonialism, or lack of education, critical education of British colonialism. So overall, I think it would be very interesting process for me while reading this, and I actually might add some books that would also balance out the perspective, that is authors that are more, have a deeper understanding and have a very historical approach to analyzing the history of the British Empire. One comes to mind, Edward Said's Orientalism. I mean, this per se is not the history of the British Empire, it's just an analysis of how the West built this discourse around the Orient, how it assigned certain, I'm looking at this mosquito which has been flying around the room for a while. I've tried to kill it several times, but it has escaped me, and it's flying and I can see it just like passing by, and it's not stopping. Obviously, at some point I will try to rid it of its life. Unfortunately, it has to be done. So Edward Said's Orientalism is examining the idea, the imaginary of the Orient in the Western mind. But what is very important, and I think it needs to be added to Orientalism, is this aspect of nesting Orientalisms, and I've talked about this in another video. And for anyone who is interested to understand how nesting Orientalisms work, and especially here in the Balkan region where we live, that is a very prominent discourse that exists, and I see it every day. I sometimes fall into a trap of nesting Orientalism. I even sort of self-orientalize my own identity when I compare it to the identity, for example, of Slovenes, which is very common. If I can, I will find a quote and I will put it in the description or maybe just over the screen so you can read it. I've already addressed this in another video, and I'm just trying to remember myself as I have read that article last year, and my memory is not that fresh how she actually defines it word to word. Yeah, so I might actually start reading this again, so it would be complementary to this book. And it would offer a little bit deeper understanding and offer a wider critical lens for the biography of Gertrude Bell. So I think that's about it for now. I will update you probably in several days. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to Serbia on Friday. So maybe next time I record, it will be from my room there, and it will be a different environment. So I will see you in the next one. Bye. So hello, it's been a minute for you, 4 weeks for me. I really thought I could juggle several things at the same time. I started this vlog with Gertrude Bell, a woman in Arabia, as you have seen in the previous part. Haven't made much progress because I haven't been really reading it at all. I picked it up like maybe a few days ago, and so far it's okay, I guess. It hasn't, the tone of the book is still the same. There is no change there, and I shouldn't expect any. I am finding new and interesting facts about her, but the book overall is not really groundbreaking, mind-blowing in any way. I don't expect it to be. And for me, so you might ask a question, why am I still reading it? I see it as a sort of exercise to expand the bar, or like push the bar higher on my level of patience and tolerance for books like this one, because at some point I will have to read something that I disagree with for work and have to present that as well in a concise manner and then apply critique of it so people can understand, instead of just getting frustrated with the reading material and tossing it away. Of course, I'm not going to do this with every single book that I run into that has this kind of discourse, but I feel like this is a very good exercise. Also, I've picked up Franz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. This is the second time I'm reading it, and I've really thought I was gonna read it fast, but I'm very slow at this. I think it has to do with how dense the writing is. It has a very theoretical analysis of the situation in the colonial world at the time when he was writing it. So you really have to concentrate. It requires a lot of like very, very slow, in-depth reading. So you would actually pay attention to greater details in his writing. And sometimes I would get like confused a little bit and would have to go back and reread some parts. Excuse me. So that's Wretched of the Earth. I've read 96 pages so far, and this is actually 60th anniversary edition. It has an introduction by Cornel West, forward by Homi K. Baba, and the last chapter is by Richard Philcox on retranslating Fanon, retrieving a lost voice. I actually wanted to do a video dedicated just to Fanon, especially because I've recently purchased, hold on a second. So I purchased this book, The Rebels Clinic, The Revolutionary Lives of Frantz Fanon. And I'm not sure how good this biography of his is, but this is the most recent one. There is another one that was published by Pluto Press that I would also like to read and compare, contrast against each other. I kind of like skim right through it, and I like when I was going through some parts, I've already found some things that I thought could be problematic. So that's Frantz Fanon for you, Wretched of the Earth. And I also read a book that was a mandatory read. My mentor gave me this book. It's called Care Ethics, Democratic Citizenship and the State. The book itself is like a compilation of different authors, different academic focuses in politics of care. And it was a little bit weak for me. There were some good chapters, others were not as good. I guess with every collection of different writers and academics and their focus, there are things that you will find a little bit annoying, maybe, or that you will not find as interesting, or that have no any kind of bearing on your own research. So overall, I think it's a good start for anyone who wants to get into the academic field of care politics. And yeah, if you are interested, you can like check it out. I'll insert the cover here, and it has like some chapters that are practical research that was done. It was not just theoretical concepts that are presented, but it has a lot of it has like 3 chapters that are presenting different research in care from different countries. And it was really useful for me to see the methodology and method that different authors use and what their focus is on, and finally, the outcome of the research. What else? I don't have anything else to say regarding this book. If you're interested, you can pick it up. And of course, depending on what your focus is going to be or what your interest might be, you can always find the bibliography at the end of each chapter if you wish to pursue certain angles more than the other angles. So yeah, that's it. As for the Queen of the Desert, I guess once I read a little bit more of this, I will definitely upload another video and I will give a more in-depth analysis of what I've been reading in Georgina Howell's book. See you soon. I'm still in bed reading. It's really dark in the room and I turned on the big ceiling lamp because the image was very bad. It was very awful. This camera can't adjust for the lack of daylight. I hope this comes out okay. So I made progress with this book, and I have to say that I don't know when was the last time I was so irritated when I was reading a book. She's just awful. I'm not sure whether the way she's portrayed by Georgina Howell that it's irritating me more, or the way she writes in her diaries. She's just awful. I mean, she's like the best example of bourgeois privilege at the time in the British Empire. It's horrible. Like, this last part that I was reading is about her presence and participation during the First World War as part of a Red Cross team, I think. She was first stationed in 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 France or Italy. I'm not sure now. Was she in Genoa? I think she was in Italy, maybe France. Don't and this whole part is about her exchange uh, of letters, her exchange of letters with this guy called Dick Doty Willie, who was her, I guess, she says the love of her life, but she keeps pointing out that they never consummated their relationship. I mean, I feel like I'm a teenager reading, some polite book telling me about what sex is. And he's actually married, and they're exchanging letters, and Georgina is constantly pointing out that once he became separated from his wife, he was like becoming more explicit in his expression of the wish to have like sexual intercourse with Belle. And she says like she says here, derived of sex in Judith's absence, Dick could think of little else. I mean, what a polite way to say the man was horny. Then what actually I'm most annoyed about is how she sees the population in the Ottoman Empire, how she sees the people there, different ethnicities. She obviously has some, I would say, love for like people that are working for her when she's doing this exploration, as Georgina says, but she's also kind of very authoritarian and demeaning. She behaves sometimes like a slave owner. In one part, she talks about this new servant she got. He's a Kurd from Syria, and how she wanted to whip them because they were not fast enough to set up tents in the pouring rain, and she didn't get any dinner because of that. Hold on, let me see if I can find that part. I marked some of it. If I can find it. Yeah, she says this man's name was Fatuh. The people seem themselves to live on bread alone. A lamb is quite out of the question. I'm going to take a flock of sheep up with me to the Karada, and Fatuh is to be shepherd as well as butler, head stableman, excavator, and friend. I hope she paid him well for all the positions that he was supposed to hold while accompanying her in the desert. Then she says, hold on, let me see. I think it's here that she talks about how she wanted to, because I didn't mark all the pages, like I underlined a lot of stuff. But I didn't mark all the pages. Yeah, here she says, this is dated Baghdad, January 9th, 1924. I'm planning a 2 days haunt by myself in the desert. I want to feel savage and independent again instead of being, then in brackets, oriental secretary in a high commissioner's office. Yesterday I was checking the archive where her photography is stored. I forgot which university it was, but you can actually just Google it. If you Google Gertrude Bell photography archive, it will come up. And they have all of her photos, and you can search by year. You can like put some keywords and find whatever you're interested in, or you can search by like the names of the places in the Middle East, because everything is sorted very well. But I wanted to see how Fatuh looked, and there are a lot of photos of him from the time she first started. He first started working for Gertrude Bell. I think it was in 1904, and you can see how his face is changing, how he's getting older and older. It was interesting to kind of put a face on the name and the stories that she was writing in her diaries and letters about him. I didn't search anything else in particular. I was just interested of the photos that she was taking while she was traveling around Saudi Arabia. She was going on this diplomatic mission. I don't know. At one point, her government told her that they're not gonna be responsible if something happens to her. So she was here in this chapter. The Georgina Howell says that she was held captive, but she wasn't really held captive. She was just waiting for a permission from some local tribesmen to allow her passage through certain regions. I mean, she behaves like rather entitled, and just the idea that she was actually working for the British government collecting information, and she also advised the British government to cooperate with Saud. And that's how Wahhabism actually came to dominate the Saudi Arabia today, what we call Saudi Arabia, uh, because the British actually decided to support one guy who claimed his rule over the territory of the Arabian Peninsula, and that's why we have today this horrible extremist interpretation of Islam in Saudi Arabia, and their family is still obviously ruling there. And she also, in this last chapter I was reading, she was also going to different factories, mines. It says here, she went out into the countryside, climbing on carts to urge the laborers and the men in the mines to do what she would have done had she been a man: join the army. So she was technically trying to convince poor people to go fight in the imperialist war. And obviously she was very successful, but halfway through she was like serving on the front. I don't think she was a nurse. She's doing some kind of, hold on a second, I think she says here she was doing like paperwork, where she was writing letters for families whose sons, husbands, fathers have died in the front line. And she was also in charge of this group, like a committee that was going into the battlefield and trying to find soldiers who were buried in a rush and to give them a proper burial. and often she would find these mass graves with, I don't know, there's one point where they find a mass grave of, I think, 90 something soldiers, and only 60 of them could be accounted for, in the sense that they had like a tag on them, that so they could identify them. The other 30 were not identified. And then she becomes disenchanted with her government and the authority, because the British government was surveilling heavily the information that was coming out of the front line. And I mean, it took her only 46 years to become disenchanted, but she still ends up going at the end of this position that she held in Europe, that she goes to Cairo to do some work there because Dick died in Gallipoli. And she was devastated. At one point, I mean, I'm just so annoyed with this author. I think I'm more annoyed with the way she writes about her than I am annoyed with. I'm annoyed with Gertrude Bell as well. I mean, I cannot expect anything more from her. She comes from a certain background. In order for you to be aware of the position that you hold in society, I mean, you have to step outside, like many others did who were her age or older, who came also from privileged background but understood what the empires at the time were all about. There's this one part, hold on, let me see if I can find it. Where she describes, yes, so here it is. As though TVly departed for Gallipoli, he found himself in a terrible dilemma. He could make his love for Gertrude plain and bring suffering to his wife, or he could support Judith and bring Gertrude unbearable pain. Both threatened suicide. Dick was exhausted by the conflict. I mean, I'm so tired of reading about women who are going at each other over some idiot man. I have no patience for such writing. As if I don't know what to say. I was recently watching a video of Hannah Dodmay. She actually did 2 videos where she sort of addressed this book by Manguso that was published recently. It's called Liars, and how awful the character of a husband is in the book. And this line actually reminds me of her commentary regarding Manguso's Liars. So I'm really annoyed, but I'm on a page 150 now, and the chapter is called The Intrusives, and this is not like, the chapters are not continuation in the timeline, but they are rather going back and forth. So each chapter is analyzing different years, so there is not like a linear sequence of years that are presented. So even though now I was reading a chapter that was addressing the last date was November 1915, now the next chapter starts with her diary entrance from May 18th, 1911. So she kind of divided the book into these different identity parts that she ascribed to Gertrude Bell, and based on those identity parts, like character features that she identified in her, she's
taking out like small snippets from her diaries and her letters, but they are not they don't have the linear progression of, let's say, we're following her from, I don't know, 1898 to 1924. I think that's it for now. I will check back with you once I finish this, hopefully today, so I can wrap this vlog. Me again. Things have gone from bad to worse. I started reading this chapter that I mentioned, and I'm only 4 pages in. And the chapter is talking about her friendship or first like meetings with Lawrence. What was his full name? Thomas Edward Lawrence, or more commonly known as Lawrence of Arabia. And Georgina Howell is talking about the conflict between British Empire and French Empire in Middle East and their scramble for the Middle East. And she says this: Gertrude, chain-smoking her way through the meetings, had a different point of view from the military. Disciplined modern warfare, she suggested, had failed on 3 fronts already. Her grasp of the situation and her persuasive clarity in presenting issues of enormous complexity led the way to realizing Lawrence's plan to roll up Syria by way of the Hejaz in the name of the Sharif, rush right up to Damascus and beef the French out of all hopes of Syria. Her knowledge of Arab methods of warfare was a novel addition to the collective determination of the Bureau to find the way ahead, probably the only one among them who had actually taken part in Gazu, always links hijacking supplies, fostering terrorism, and provoking guerrilla warfare. In a radio broadcast of 1927, Lawrence admitted that on the subject of Arab revolt, he owed much to Gertrude. Obviously, the way she writes is that she is talking about some facts, historical facts, but the tone of the writing is such that you don't really understand it as simply statement of what had happened, but you see a sense of admiration. And this is why I'm so annoyed with this book, that throughout the book you can see this level of admiration that borderlines some kind of pathology in our societies regarding individuals like Gertrude Bell or Lawrence of Arabia. And obviously her admiration of Gertrude is simply there because she's a woman. She expresses this multiple times, that, you know, she was one of the rare women who actually was able to do all of these things at the time and pursue all these interests, and how she was incredible in that sense. And this is the failure of the liberal feminism, where we are glorifying a woman who actually helped navigate the policies of the British Empire to carve up the Middle East. And this is just horrendous for me. There is no any moment where she's kind of in doubt of whether this was okay or not. Like, she's just straightforward admiring everything she did. And that's why I think this whole book is awful, and Georgina Howell's perspective is awful, and Gertrude Bell as an individual is awful, or was awful. So I'll continue reading, but I just wanted to share this part as it kind of blew me away. Not in the sense that I am discovering something new, but to have it so blatantly in front of you is very different than being, aware. I'm reading, I don't read these kind of books very often, so it's very still kind of appalling for me to consume this kind of material. Okay, I'll check in with you if there is anything more. Finished this dreadful book. I don't think I have anything new to add except to maybe expand a little bit on what was written in the subsequent chapters. There's not much difference in regards to the material that is shared. It's just a confirmation of the same thing over and over again. It's the chapters that I didn't address were dedicated to her relationship with Lawrence. Then after that, chapter addressing her efforts to create an independent state of Iraq, to decide who's going to be the leader of Iraq. And of course, all of this is presented as if everything she did and everything the British government did in the region was done out of the sole goodness of the heart of the British government, because it just wanted to give some sort of civilized governing body to the people of Iraq and other nations that were created at a later time. There is no reflection that the reason they were doing this and creating the states and supporting certain individuals as leaders of those states for their own goals and interests. It's sort of presented as everything that was done because they just simply cared about people there. All of the reforms, all of the infrastructure that they invested in, education, healthcare, it was all left in shambles by the Turkish imperial rule. And now the British came and they were sweeping the dirt that was left behind. At one point, the author even says, there is obviously this extreme Turkophobia throughout the writing. I haven't studied any primary sources regarding the local sentiments towards the Ottoman Empire, but as with every empire, I'm pretty sure that there were groups that weren't taken as equal citizens as some other groups. But at the same time, I wouldn't take the narrative that is given in this book as something that is historical fact, simply because it's polished and narrated in a way to show British government in this very positive light. At one point I was thinking maybe she didn't understand what her role was in colonialism, in maintaining the colonial structures of the British Empire in the Middle East. But she was very much aware, because Howell quotes one of her diaries where she actually expresses this explicitly. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. She says here, A.T. Wilson proved to be a boss whose high-handed tactics, punitive retaliation against Dissidence and preference for imperialist policies brought home Gertrude the appalling truth: he had no sympathy for self-determination and would do his best to prevent it. He was built from a heroic colonialist mold, but his views placed him in the past. Gertrude, though 18 years older, particular intelligence and her wholehearted dedication to the Arab cause belonged to the future. We know that I'm just going to close the window. There's so much commotion outside. There's so many people outside. I don't know what it is, but these buildings are set in a way that it creates sort of like an echo, and whoever is speaking below the building, it can be heard on the third floor where I am, especially if the window is open. So basically, she's trying to say that Gertrude was not that bad imperialist. She was fighting for the cause and independence of the Iraqis in this case, or the Arab nationhood. But in other points, she actually talks about British colonialism, and she's very much aware what her role as someone who is serving the British government in the Middle East. Oh, I'm trying to find this quote, but again, I am not able to. I should have done this a little bit better to prepare, but I'm so done with this book that I just want to wrap this vlog. Yeah, she says here, this is also a very good quote. Howell writes, how was she to deliver a form of democracy to a country so ignorant of national politics and comprised of so many factions? As she wrote, quote from Bell's, diary, the rank and file of the tribesmen, the shepherds, marsh dwellers, rice barley and date cultivators of the Euphrates and Tigris, whose experience of statecraft was confined to speculations as to the performance of the next-door neighbors, could hardly be asked who should next be the ruler of the country and by what constitution. So this is this kind of like superior attitude that they had. We, as more superior and knowing and wiser and better governing peoples, we should be the ones who should be deciding for the rest of the world how they should govern themselves, and in what format, who's going to do it. And of course, we're going to decide all of this based on the simple fact who is going to represent our interests in that country. I mean, nothing has changed since this was written in 1920, so 100 years, 104 years. Nothing has changed. We're still doing it, and we can see that that has been done in Middle East over and over again. It was done here in the Balkans. It was done different parts of the world at different times, that this sort of demeaning attitude towards the local populations of those regions, that they don't know how they should live. We should actually teach them how they should live. And it's just the narrative throughout the book. Of course, a lot of the times it's not as explicit. It's very kind of hidden, and you have to read between the lines. But at times you will run into these explicit statements of this Western colonial attitude of superiority. Do I have anything positive to say about Gertrude Bell and Georgina Howell? I actually don't. If you want to experience firsthand the mindset of those who participated in the colonial structures, governing colonial structures at the time, I think it's a good idea to start digging through primary sources in archives. Those are all publicly open. And I believe we all at one point should take our time and try to find this material, whatever topic interests us, because it really helps you understand the context, the structures at B, and in general, how overwhelming everything was for the people who lived in these colonized places. I mean, they talk about them from this perspective as if this is like a technical thing that you need to do, like there are no people there living whose lives won't be greatly affected by these changes that are made in these cozy rooms thousands of miles away from the region where these people live. Not surprised. I mean, we're still witnessing things like that. So, should I recommend this for you to read if you want to get your nerves strike? Maybe. I don't know. I won't pick it up. It's not worth your time. I did it for you. So I spent some time reading this very enlightening collection of diaries, letters, and other writings of Gertrude Bell. Okay, well, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.